January 8th, 2009. The morning sun filters into a bedroom in Reisterstown, Maryland. It looks like a nursery. There is a crib. There are baby toys. Melanie Greenberg leans over the railing, gently waking her daughter with a soft kiss. "Good morning, sunshine," she whispers. She lifts the tiny, fragile body into her arms. She weighs just 16 pounds. She has the wide, innocent eyes of an infant and the soft, unblemished skin of a baby. But this morning routine is not what it seems. Melanie does not carry her daughter to a high chair for scrambled eggs. Brooke cannot chew. She cannot swallow solid food. Instead, her mother carefully prepares a formula, connecting a tube directly to the peg port in Brooke's stomach. It is a medical ritual, performed with the practiced ease of a lifetime. Today is a special day. Brooke's three sisters, Emily, Caitlin, and Carly, crowd into the room.
They are young women now, grown up, moving on with their lives. But their sister has stayed behind. They shuffle through a dresser filled with onesies and toddler clothes, finally choosing a tiny dress decorated with daisies, a garment that would fit a doll. They carry her downstairs, her head resting on their shoulders like a newborn. They gently buckle her into a high chair. From the kitchen, Melanie brings out a chocolate cake, its surface blazing with fire. The family gathers around. They sing happy birthday. Brooke, delighted by the lights and the sound, claps her small hands and makes happy cooing sounds, the only language she possesses. Her sisters lean in to help her blow out the candles because she doesn't understand how to do it herself. They count the candles. There are 16 of them. On this day, the baby in the high chair is turning 16 years old.
When the human body defies the fundamental rules of existence, we look to medicine for answers. But sometimes, science stares back in silence. Brooke Greenberg was a medical impossibility. She was one of only a handful of people in recorded history to live with a condition so rare, so baffling, that for years it had no name. Doctors simply called it Syndrome X. It appeared to be a total freezing of time.
A severe, global developmental delay that kept her trapped in the body and mind of a toddler, even as the decades passed. But this was not the eternal youth of fairy tales. It was a prison. Her condition came with a host of life-threatening internal deformities, breathing difficulties, and a digestive system that refused to mature. For thousands of years, alchemists and scientists have hunted for the secret to stopping the aging process.
They looked to mercury, to stem cells, to expensive serums, but they never imagined that the answer might lie hidden in the DNA of a fragile girl from the suburbs of Baltimore. Her story began in the early 1990s. Melanie and Howard Greenberg were living the American dream. Howard was a salesman, Melanie a devoted mother. They were already raising two healthy, growing daughters, Emily and Caitlin. Their life was normal, predictable, and happy.
Until their third pregnancy began, and the clock broke. When Melanie became pregnant for the third time in 1992, she expected the same smooth journey she had experienced with her first two daughters. But almost immediately, instinct told her something was wrong. By the second trimester, the medical charts confirmed her fears. A healthy fetus grows steadily, gaining 1 to 2 ounces a week. But inside Melanie, the baby's growth was erratic, stalling and starting in a worrying pattern.
Melanie's own weight gain halted. Doctors grew increasingly alarmed. They warned that this severe intrauterine growth restriction could be catastrophic. If the baby's lungs didn't develop properly, she wouldn't be able to take her first breath. Her immune system would likely be dangerously fragile, leaving her defenseless against even the most minor infections. Before she was even born, Brooke was already fighting for her life. Melanie was desperate. She followed every rule, ate every nutrient, but nothing worked.
The obstetrician suspected a failure in the umbilical cord itself, a lifeline that was strangling rather than sustaining. He gave the Greenbergs a terrifying ultimatum. If they waited for the due date, the baby might die in the womb. They had no choice. Brooke Greenberg was delivered by emergency C-section on January 8, 1993. She was tiny, weighing just 4 pounds. But as the doctors examined her, a hush fell over the room. Her hips were severely malformed. She suffered from an extreme anterior hip dislocation, a condition so profound that her tiny legs were contorted, bent impossibly upward toward her head. It looked, horrifyingly, as if the infant had been folded in half. She was immediately rushed to surgery. Doctors managed to correct the dysplasia, resetting the bones and placing her in a cast. But the prognosis was grim. Even with the surgery, they warned her parents that the damage was extensive. Brooke, they said, might never be able to walk. During those first 5 weeks in the NICU, doctors began to notice other, subtler signs. Brooke's ears were shaped strangely. Her eyes were unusually wide-set. In the world of genetics, these are known as dysmorphic features, telltale physical clues that point to a deeper error in the DNA blueprint. The medical team was convinced they were dealing with a known syndrome. The combination of slow growth and facial anomalies pointed strongly to conditions like Down syndrome, caused by an extra chromosome 21, or Noonan syndrome, a genetic disorder known to stunt growth and damage the heart. They ran the standard battery of genetic tests, expecting a quick confirmation. But the results were baffling. Negative for Down syndrome, negative for Noonan. In fact, Brooke's karyotype, the map of her chromosomes, appeared completely normal. There was no known genetic mutation. Her doctors were dumbfounded. They had a child who was clearly syndromic, but science couldn't tell them why. Despite the mystery, Brooke showed resilience. She healed from her hip surgery and learned to drink from a bottle. With no immediate diagnosis to keep her, the doctors allowed the Greenbergs to take their mysterious daughter home. But the respite was short-lived. At home, it became clear that Brooke's immune system was as undeveloped as the rest of her body. She suffered from chronic, terrifying respiratory infections, gasping for air as her parents watched in helpless panic. And then the seizures began. Convulsions are not uncommon in sick infants, often triggered by fever. But Brooke's were different. They were violent, unpredictable storms of electrical activity in the brain. The culmination came when she was 4 years old. She suffered a status epilepticus, a single continuous seizure that lasted for a harrowing 45 minutes. Doctors rushed her into an MRI, certain they would find a tumor, a lesion, or severe epilepsy. But the scans came back clean. There was no tumor, no structural defect. The only finding was that her brain, like her body, was simply paused. It was underdeveloped, a toddler's brain in a child's skull, firing miscoded signals into the void. Miraculously, Brooke survived the mega-seizure without permanent damage, but her body was failing in other ways. Her esophagus was not coordinating with her stomach. Every time she ate, food threatened to aspirate into her lungs, putting her at constant risk of deadly pneumonia. She was starving. Doctors made the difficult decision to surgically insert a PEG tube directly into her stomach. From that day on, Brooke would never eat a meal like a normal child again. And just as the family was adjusting to this new reality, disaster struck again. Brooke suffered a massive stroke.
Strokes are incredibly rare in children, a catastrophe usually reserved for the elderly. A blood clot had interrupted the flow to her brain, threatening to destroy what little cognitive development she had achieved. The Greenbergs prepared for the worst: paralysis, brain death, the end. But Brooke was resilient. Against all odds, she recovered from the stroke with no lasting deficits. It seemed her body, though broken, was indomitable. Until, just before her 5th birthday, she fell asleep and didn't wake up.
She sank into a deep, coma-like lethargy. In the emergency room, an MRI revealed a terrifying shadow, a lemon-sized mass in her brain. The doctors diagnosed it as a malignant tumor. It was massive, aggressive, and completely inoperable. The Greenbergs were told to prepare for the end. They were given a timeline, 48 hours. They bought a tiny white casket. They called a rabbi. They sat by her bedside, holding her hand, waiting for her last breath.
But 48 hours passed, then a week, then 2. For 14 days, Brooke slept, a sleeping beauty in a sterile tower. And then, on the 14th day, she opened her eyes. She smiled. She was awake. Doctors rushed her to imaging. They prepared to see the tumor that had surely killed her. But when the images appeared on the screen, the room went silent. The mass was gone, vanished.
Whether it was a tumor that spontaneously regressed or a massive edema that resolved, no one could say. It was a medical impossibility, a miracle. After the miracle, the storm broke, the seizure stopped, the stroke ceased. Brooke entered a period of strange, stable calm. But while her health stabilized, time did not. Years passed, but Brooke remained frozen. At 5 years old, she still weighed only 13 pounds. She still had her baby teeth. She still communicated in coos and gestures. She was a permanent infant. With her health improved, she began attending a school for children with special needs. She couldn't walk, but she learned to scoot around in a customized rolling walker, exploring her world with the wide-eyed wonder of a toddler. But her parents needed to know why. Why was their daughter trapped in time? Doctors were stumped. There was no precedent, no textbook case. So her pediatrician, Dr.
Lawrence Pakula, gave the unknown entity a name. It was a placeholder, a mark on a map for a territory no one had ever explored. He called it Syndrome X. Desperate to jumpstart her growth, the Greenbergs turned to endocrinology. They hoped that perhaps Brooke's pituitary gland wasn't producing enough somatotropin, the crucial growth hormone. They began a regimen of daily injections. It was a potent treatment that should have triggered a growth spurt, but Brooke's body simply ignored it.
She didn't grow an inch. She didn't gain an ounce. It was as if her cells had locked their doors. Doctors then looked for other rare aging disorders. They tested for Werner syndrome, a condition that causes rapid, premature aging. Perhaps Brooke had a reverse form of it. But the tests came back negative. Every genetic probe, every hormonal trick, every theory hit a dead end. Brooke wasn't just rare, she was unique. As the years passed, the legend of the girl who didn't age spread. Howard Greenberg, ever the optimist, began to wonder if his daughter's suffering had a higher purpose. "What if Brooke holds the secret to aging?" he asked a journalist. "We'd like to find out." In 2005,
A special report on NBC's Dateline beamed Brooke's face into millions of homes. In Tampa, Florida, a woman watched, mesmerized. She called out to her husband, "Richard, you have to see this." Her husband was Dr. Richard Walker. An elite endocrinologist and researcher, Walker was a man obsessed. Haunted by the deterioration of his own grandparents, he had dedicated his life to solving the ultimate biological riddle. Why do we age? Why do we die? He believed there was a master switch in our DNA, a program that dictates our decline.
And when he saw Brooke Greenberg on that screen, a 12-year-old girl trapped in a toddler's body, he realized he might be looking at the key. If he could decode her, he might just unlock the secret to eternal youth. Walker flew to Baltimore. He expected to find a frozen child. What he found was far more complex. Brooke was 12, but her body was a chaotic mosaic of different biological ages. She still had her baby teeth, but dental scans showed the roots were roughly 8 years old. Her bones, fragile and small, had the density of a 10-year-old. Her brain was stuck at 8 months. Yet her hair and fingernails grew at a completely normal adult rate, requiring constant trimming. She wasn't just not aging, she was aging out of sync. Walker realized her body wasn't following a single master clock.
Instead, the individual parts were drifting through time at their own independent speeds. It was a condition he had never seen before. He termed it developmental disorganization, and he knew with absolute certainty that the cause had to be hidden somewhere deep in her genetic code. We see aging in gray hair and wrinkles, but the true clock ticks deep inside our cells. Every day, billions of our cells divide to keep us alive, but this process is imperfect.
Think of your DNA like a document and your cells like a photocopy machine. When you're young, the copies are crisp and clear. But as you age, you make copies of copies of copies. The ink fades, smudges appear, errors creep in. Eventually, the text becomes unreadable. The cell fails, and we age. Dr. Walker needed to know, was Brooke's photocopy machine frozen in time, or was it broken in a completely new way? He suspected that while her external body was suspended in amber, her internal machinery might be tearing itself apart. He needed proof, and to find it, he would have to look at the very tips of her chromosomes. Dr. Sutcliffe zoomed in on Brooke's telomeres, the protective caps on her DNA that shorten with age. If Brooke wasn't aging, these should have been long and pristine. But they weren't. They were shockingly short. Cellularly, Brooke wasn't a baby.
She was aging faster than a normal teenager. It was a complete contradiction. Her body was young, but her cells were old. This led Walker to a new, disturbing theory. Brooke wasn't frozen. She was chaotic. Her body parts weren't communicating. Her bones thought she was 10. Her teeth thought she was 8. Her brain thought she was an infant, and her cells thought she was elderly. He called it developmental disorganization. Her body wasn't a symphony. It was a cacophony of instruments all playing at different tempos. And this internal chaos, he realized, was likely the cause of her seizures, her strokes, and her constant suffering. Her systems weren't just failing to grow, they were failing to work together to keep her alive. Walker was convinced the answer lay in a single elusive typo in Brooke's genetic code.
But finding it was like finding a needle in a haystack the size of the universe.
He needed to search through 3 billion DNA base pairs. He needed to sequence her entire genome. But he had a problem. In genetics, you find answers by comparing cases, and as far as anyone knew, Brooke was the only one of her kind. She was a sample size of 1. Still, Walker prepared for the monumental task. He was ready to crack the code. And then, silence. In 2009, just as Brooke turned 16, the Greenberg family abruptly cut all ties with Dr. Walker. They stopped returning calls. They withdrew from the study. No public explanation was ever given. Perhaps they were exhausted. Perhaps they wanted privacy. Whatever the reason, Walker was left standing at the threshold of discovery. The door slammed in his face. Walker feared the research was dead.
He resigned himself to the idea that Brooke's secrets would die with her. But then, the story went global. A TLC documentary about the 20-year-old baby aired to millions. Most watched with fascination, but a few watched with recognition. Scattered across the country, isolated families saw their own lives reflected on the screen. They realized they weren't crazy. They weren't alone. The phone in Walker's office began to ring. One call came from Billings, Montana. A mother named Mary Margaret Williams told him about her daughter, Gabby. Gabby was 5, but she was the size of a toddler. She had the same fine hair, the same wide eyes, the same silence. She wasn't an exact copy of Brooke. Her growth had stopped a bit later, but the resemblance was haunting. Walker realized with a jolt, Brooke wasn't unique. She was just the first. The similarities were chilling.
Like Brooke, little Gabby Williams was plagued by a disconnected laundry list of medical crises. She couldn't swallow. She gasped for air through chronic respiratory infections. She was kept alive by a feeding tube. And crucially, she simply refused to grow. Dr. Walker was convinced he had found another one, a second patient with Syndrome X. He immediately sequenced the DNA of the entire Williams family. He found anomalies, sure, tiny glitches in the code, but nothing that explained the magnitude of the condition. There was no smoking gun mutation. But Walker wasn't deterred. He knew that Gabby and Brooke were sisters in biology, if not in blood, and he was determined to find the link that bound them together. In 2013, Walker adopted a radical new tool, the epigenetic clock. This technology looks past the DNA sequence itself, focusing instead on how it's used. It measures methylation, tiny chemical markers that attach to our genes like rust accumulating on a machine. By reading these markers, scientists can determine the precise biological age of any tissue, regardless of how old the person actually is. Walker applied this test to Gabby's blood. He hypothesized that he would find the same chaos he had seen in Brooke, that her blood would be older or younger than her body. But the results were a shock. Gabby's blood was normal. Its cellular age matched her chronological age perfectly. The mystery deepened. If her cells were aging normally, why was her body frozen in time? The puzzle was maddeningly complex. But Walker was no longer working with a sample size of 1. Another documentary, this time focused on Gabby, acted as a beacon. 3 more families emerged from the shadows. 3 more girls frozen in time around the age of 3 or 4. Their names were Lila, Alyssa, and Jennifer. Now, Walker had a cohort. He teamed up with Dr. Radoje Dramenak, a pioneer in genomics. In 2015, they launched the most ambitious study yet. They would sequence the entire genomes of all the girls and their parents. It was a hunt for a single typo in an encyclopedia set 1,000,000 pages long. It's like finding one spelling mistake in a library full of books, Walker said. But they had the technology.
Blood samples were flown to a high-tech lab in San Jose. The supercomputers began to hum. 4 weeks later, the results were in, and they were nothing short of a revelation. Dr. Walker and Dr. Derminack discovered that Lila, Alyssa, and Jennifer all shared mutations in the exact same 5 genes. It was the smoking gun. These specific genes were responsible for synthesizing crucial proteins, the microscopic workers that build and maintain the body.
Because of the mutation, the girls' bodies weren't just growing slowly. They were trying to build a skyscraper without steel or concrete. This failure explained everything: the stunted growth, the failing organs, the cognitive delay. Crucially, these mutations were de novo. They hadn't been inherited from the parents. They were spontaneous, tragic errors that had occurred at the very moment of conception. Lightning had struck the same spot 3 times. They finally had a name for the unknown.
They called it Neotenic Complex Syndrome. Neotenic for the trapped childlike state of the patients. Complex for the devastation it wreaked on their internal systems. For Brooke Greenberg, the girl who started it all, the answer came too late. Brooke died in 2013, at the age of 20. She weighed just 17 pounds. Her official cause of death was bronchomalacia, a collapse of the airways. Her tiny body simply couldn't take another breath. She never lived to be tested for the specific gene, but her doctors are certain she was the first. Her suffering was the map that allowed others to be found. Today, geneticists believe that unlocking the secrets of these girls' DNA could lead to treatments for age-related diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. In the tragedy of their frozen lives, they may have given us the key to understanding our own mortality. The fountain of youth wasn't a myth. It was a genetic error. The story of the girl who refused to age is just one file from our archives. Each case is a testament to the fragile, mysterious miracle of human life. If you wish to uncover more of these forgotten stories, subscribe to Medical Obscura and press the notification bell. Join us as we continue to explore the shadows where science and the unexplained collide. We have many more cases to open.